The penthouse loomed above the city like a glass fortress, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the restless pulse of the skyline. I stood in the entryway, my heels clicking against the polished marble, each step echoing in the vast, hollow space. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne, a sterile reminder of the world I'd stumbled into. I was here for one reason, a deal, a cold transactional bargain. Tutor Julian Hart's daughter, and he'd throw me a lifeline to save my crumbling startup. Nothing more, nothing less. I adjusted the scarf around my neck, my fingers lingering on the soft wool as I caught my reflection in a sleek, frameless mirror. The woman staring back, Clara Evans, 36, sharp-edged and hollow-eyed, looked like a stranger. I'd built that edge over years, brick by brick, after walking away from my mother's tear-streaked pleas to chase a dream that now lay in ruins. This wasn't where I'd imagined myself, bartering my time for a rich man's money, but pride had long since abandoned me, leaving only the dull ache of necessity. The elevator doors hissed open behind me, and there he was, Julian Hart, all tailored lines and calculated poise. His dark suit clung to him like a second skin, and his presence filled the room without effort, the kind of quiet power that didn't need to shout. His eyes, a steely gray, swept over me, assessing, dismissing. "You're the tutor," he said, his voice flat, clipped. "You teach Lily. I pay you. Don't meddle in my life." I bristled, my jaw tightening. "I'm not here to meddle," I shot back, matching his tone. "I'm here to work." He didn't respond, just turned toward the hallway, expecting me to follow like some obedient shadow. I hated him already, hated the arrogance in his stride, the way he assumed I'd bend to his rules, but I followed anyway. I had no choice. He led me to a dimly lit study, where a small figure sat hunched over a desk, her blonde hair spilling over a book like a curtain. Lily. 8 years old, fragile as a bird, her thin fingers clutching a pencil that hadn't moved in minutes. She looked up as we entered, her wide, round eyes locking onto mine, blue and searching, brimming with something I couldn't name. Fear? Hope? I didn't know, but it hit me like a fist, stirring a pang I hadn't felt in years. "Here's your teacher," Julian said to her, his tone softening just enough to surprise me. He didn't linger, though, didn't even glance back as he left, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made the room feel smaller. I was alone with her now, this quiet girl who seemed to carry a weight far beyond her years. "Hi, Lily," I said, forcing a smile as I set my bag down. "What are we working on?" She didn't answer right away, just pushed the book toward me. A worn copy of Charlotte's Web, its pages dog-eared and soft. Her fingers trembled slightly, and I noticed the way she kept her head down, avoiding my gaze. Something about it tugged at me, a thread of memory I couldn't place. My mother's hands, maybe, folding laundry in silence after I'd told her I was leaving. I shook it off. "Let's start with chapter 3, I said, flipping the book open. My voice sounded too loud in the stillness, too brittle. Lily nodded, barely audible as she whispered, "Okay." We read together, her soft voice stumbling over the words while I corrected her gently, trying to focus on the task. But my eyes kept drifting, past the desk, past the shelves lined with leather-bound books, to a door at the far end of the hall. It was different from the others, heavier, with a rusted lock that gleamed faintly in the shadows. A shiver ran through me, unbidden. What was behind it? Why did it feel like it was watching me? The hour crept by, and Lily grew quieter, her yawns punctuating the silence. I closed the book, my fingers brushing the faded cover. "We'll pick up tomorrow," I told her, standing to gather my things. She reached out then, her small hand catching mine. A sudden, desperate grip that stopped me cold. "You'll come back, right?" she asked, her voice so soft it barely reached me. Her eyes were pleading now, bright with something raw and unguarded. I froze, my throat tightening. "Of course," I managed, though the words felt hollow. I wasn't here for her, not really. I was here for the money, for survival. But the way she looked at me, like I was some lifeline she'd been waiting for, cracked something inside me I'd long sealed shut. I pulled my hand away too quickly and forced a nod. "Tomorrow." As I stepped into the hall, Julian was there again, leaning against the wall with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Bourbon, probably. Expensive, like everything else in this place. "She likes you," he said, his tone flat, but his eyes sharp, studying me. "Don't get attached." "Don't worry," I replied, my voice ice. "I'm not here for that." But even as I said it, I felt the lie settle in my chest, heavy and restless. I turned to leave, my scarf slipping slightly as I moved, but his gaze followed me, piercing, unyielding. I hated how it made me feel seen, exposed, when all I wanted was to disappear. The elevator ride down was silent, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and silver beyond the glass. I told myself this was just a job, a means to an end. Teach the girl, take the money, walk away. Simple, clean. But Lily's trembling hand lingered in my mind, and that locked door. Its silent presence gnawed at me, a mystery I didn't want to unravel but couldn't ignore. I stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin, and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. This wasn't just a deal. It was a trap, one I wasn't sure I could escape. The study felt like a tomb tonight, its high ceilings swallowing, the faint hum of the city beyond the penthouse walls. I sat across from Lily, the desk between us a battlefield of open books and scattered pencils. The lamp cast a weak amber glow over her small hands as they gripped Charlotte's Web, her fingers hovering over the page like she was afraid to turn it. I'd been here 24 hours ago, promising to return, but the weight of that promise pressed harder now, heavier than I'd expected. I leaned forward, folding the corner of a page absently as she yawned, a small, tired sound that tugged at something buried deep. "Let's try the next paragraph," I said, my voice steady but hollow in the stillness. She nodded, her blonde hair slipping over her shoulder, and began reading in that soft, halting way of hers. Charlotte spun her web in the dark. Her words trailed off, and I corrected her gently, guiding her through the sentence. But my mind wasn't on the story. It was on the silence, the kind that wasn't empty but alive, watching me. I'd spent years building walls around myself, brick by brick, after I walked out on my mother. She'd stood in our cramped kitchen, folding laundry with those quiet, deliberate hands begging me not to go. "You'll regret it, Clara," she'd said, her voice cracking. I didn't listen. I chased a career, a name, a life that glittered from a distance, until it all collapsed, leaving me here, teaching a stranger's child to scrape by. And yet, sitting with Lily, I felt those walls tremble, just a little. The door creaked open, and I glanced up. Julian stood there, framed in the shadows, his silhouette sharp against the hallway light. He didn't say anything, just watched, his gray eyes cutting through the dimness like blades. I'd caught him doing this yesterday, too, lingering outside the room, but tonight it unnerved me more. What was he looking for? Weakness? A reason to send me packing? I straightened, meeting his gaze with a defiance I didn't fully feel. He didn't flinch, just held it, unreadable. Lily's voice faltered, and I turned back to her. "Keep going," I said, softer now, my hand brushing her arm. She nodded, her small frame curling inward as she read on. I tried to focus, but Julian's presence lingered like a draft I couldn't shake. He wasn't just a cold CEO in a penthouse tower. He was something else, something broken, hiding behind that polished exterior. I hated how I noticed it, hated how it made me wonder. Footsteps broke the silence, heavier this time, and an older woman stepped into the room. Eleanor, Julian's mother. Her silver hair was pulled tight, her posture rigid, every inch the matriarch of this gilded cage. She carried a tray with a glass of water, setting it down with a deliberate clink. "You're still here," she said, her voice low and edged, with frost. "I assumed you'd be gone by now." I bristled, my fingers tightening around the book. "I'm here for Lily," I replied, matching her chill. "Not for your son, if that's what you're worried about." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as they swept over me, judging, dissecting. "Julian needs stability," she said, each word a barb. "Not someone who runs when things get hard. I know your type, Clara. You abandoned your own family, didn't you?" The accusation hit like a slap, sharp and sudden. How did she know? My chest tightened, memories flooding back. My mother's quiet sobs, the suitcase I'd dragged out the door. I opened my mouth to retort, but Lily's voice cut through, small and trembling. "Grandma, don't." She slid off her chair and grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly firm. "I want her to stay, please." Eleanor froze, her stern facade cracking just enough to show surprise. I felt it too, a jolt of something warm and unfamiliar, spreading from where Lily's hand clung to me. I looked down at her, those wide blue eyes pleading again, and my throat closed up. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Eleanor didn't respond, just turned and left, her heels clicking down the hall like a retreating storm. Julian stepped closer then, his shadow falling over the desk. "She's right, you know," he said, his tone flat but laced with something I couldn't place. Warning, maybe, or regret. "You don't belong here." He didn't move, didn't elaborate, just stood there, his presence a wall I couldn't climb. Then why keep me? I snapped, my patience fraying. "If I'm such a mistake, fire me." He didn't answer right away, just sipped from a glass I hadn't noticed before. Bourbon, the scent sharp and bitter. "Lily likes you," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. "That's enough, for now." I wanted to argue, to throw his words back in his face, but Lily's hand was still on my arm, anchoring me. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "For now." He nodded once, then turned away, disappearing into the hall. The room felt colder without him, emptier, though I couldn't say why. Lily climbed back into her chair, her yawn wider. This time. "You're good at reading," she murmured, her head dipping toward the desk. I smiled despite myself, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "You're not so bad yourself," I said, my voice softening. She didn't reply, just leaned into my touch, a small, unconscious gesture that hit me harder than Eleanor's words. I gathered my things, the book still open on the desk, its folded corner a silent marker of this moment. As I stepped into the hall, I glanced back at that locked door, its rusted bolt glinting faintly, a question I didn't want to ask. Julian's warning echoed in my head, but so did Lily's plea. I wasn't here for attachment, I told myself. I was here for survival. But as the elevator doors closed behind me, swallowing me in their steel embrace, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already crossed a line, one I might not be able to step back from. Rain battered the penthouse, windows like 1,000 tiny fists, the sound relentless as it streaked down the glass in jagged silver trails. I stood in the hallway, my coat still damp from the dash through the storm, staring at that locked door again, It was the third night I'd been here, and it drew me like a magnet. Its heavy frame and rusted bolt, a silent challenge in the dim light. The wind howled outside, slipping through some unseen crack, and I swore I heard it. A faint, mournful tune, drifting from behind that barrier. A music box, maybe. Or my imagination, fraying under the weight of this place. I shouldn't care. I'd told myself that a dozen times since stepping into Julian Hart's world. A deal was a deal, nothing more. Teach Lily, take the money, save my company. Keep it clean, keep it distant. But last night had shifted something. Lily's small hand on my arm, Eleanor's cutting words. They'd pried open a crack in my armor, letting old ghosts seep through. My mother's voice, soft and broken, echoed in my head. You'll regret it, Clara. I'd spent years proving her wrong, only to end up here, drowning in regrets I couldn't name. The study door creaked behind me, and I turned to see Lily peeking out, her blonde hair a messy halo in the lamplight. You're late, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was no blame in it, just a quiet hope that made my chest ache. Sorry, I muttered, shrugging off my coat and hanging it on the rack. The rain slowed me down. She nodded, stepping back to let me in, and I followed, the warmth of the room a stark contrast to the chill clinging to my skin. We settled at the desk, Charlotte's Web open between us, but my focus kept slipping. That tune, if it was real, haunted me, a thread I couldn't let go of. Lily read haltingly, her finger tracing the words, and I corrected her absently, my eyes darting to the hallway every few minutes. What was Julian hiding? I'd seen the cracks in his facade last night, the way he'd softened with Lily, the reluctance in his voice when he said she liked me. He wasn't just the cold, untouchable CEO I'd pegged him for. There was something, raw beneath it, something he guarded behind that door. Clara? Lily's voice pulled me back, small and uncertain. She'd stopped reading, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Are you okay? I forced a smile, brushing it off. Just distracted, let's keep going. But as she nodded and started again, I caught movement in the hall. Julian, stepping out of the shadows like a specter. He didn't come closer, just stood there, his silhouette stark against the faint glow. Watching again. Always watching. My skin prickled, a mix of irritation and unease. What did he want from me? The hour dragged on, and Lily's yawns grew more frequent. I closed the book, my fingers lingering on its worn spine. That's enough for tonight, I said, standing to stretch. She didn't argue, just slid off her chair and shuffled toward the door, pausing to glance back. Good night, she murmured, then disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with the silence. And that damn door. I should have left then. Grabbed my coat, taken the elevator down, gone home to my cramped apartment where the world made sense. But my feet carried me to the living room instead, where Julian stood by the window, staring out at the rain-swept city. His back was to me, broad and unyielding, but the glass reflected his face, sharp jaw, furrowed brow, a man carrying more than he let on. What's behind that door? The question slipped out before I could stop it, sharp and unbidden. He stiffened, his shoulders tensing, but he didn't turn. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Broken mono boy tieng mua. Don't ask about things that aren't your business, he said finally, his voice low, edged with steel. He pivoted then, his gray eyes locking onto mine. Cold, but not empty. There was pain there, buried deep, flickering like a flame about to gutter out. His hand gripped a glass of bourbon, and I saw it tremble, just for a second, before he steadied. If it's not my business, why does it feel like it's screaming at me? I shot back, my pulse quickening. I didn't know why I pushed. Maybe it was the rain, the music, the way this place pressed on every nerve I had left. You've got me here, playing tutor in your little kingdom. I deserve to know what I'm walking into. His jaw tightened, and he took a step closer, close enough that I caught the sharp scent of bourbon on his breath. You're here to teach Lily, he said, each word deliberate, cutting. That's all you need to know. Push further, and you're out. Then why not kick me out now? I challenged, my voice rising despite myself. If I'm such a threat, why let me stay? He didn't answer, just stared at me, his gaze a wall I couldn't breach. The tremble in his hand was gone now, replaced by a stillness that unnerved me more than his anger. Because she needs you, he said. At last, so quiet I almost missed it, he turned back to the window, dismissing me without another word. I stood there, rooted, my heart pounding in my chest. She needs you. Not I need you. Not we. Just Lily. And yet, it felt like more. A confession he hadn't meant to let slip. I grabbed my coat, my fingers fumbling with the damp fabric as I stormed to the elevator. The doors slid shut, and the hum of descent swallowed me whole, but his words clung to me like the rain on my skin. She needs you. So why did it feel like he did too? And that door, its whispers followed me down, a riddle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But as the city lights blurred past, I knew one thing. I'd be back tomorrow, not just for Lily, for answers. The chandelier glittered above like a constellation of sharp-edged stars, casting fractured light across the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a glass of untouched champagne in my hand, feeling like an intruder in this sea of tailored suits and sequined gowns. Flashbulbs popped around me, their bursts blinding, as reporters swarmed the room, hungry for a headline. I wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. But Julian had dragged me into it, his voice clipped over the phone an hour ago. I need you at the gala. It's for Lily's sake. A lie, I suspected. But I'd come anyway, tethered by a deal I couldn't break. I adjusted the strap of my clutch in the back seat of his sleek black car on the way over, my fingers fumbling with the thin leather as I caught my reflection in the tinted window. The dress, a last-minute loan from Julian's assistant, clung to me, deep navy and elegant, but it felt like a costume. I wasn't this woman, poised and polished. I was Clara Evans, the one who'd traded family for ambition, only to watch it all crumble. Yet here I was, playing the part of Julian Hart's companion, to silence the whispers about his private life. The irony stung. He stood beside me now, a tower of quiet control, his dark suit impeccable as he nodded at passing guests, CEOs, philanthropists, people whose names I'd seen in headlines but never cared to know. His hand brushed my elbow, guiding me forward, and I stiffened at the contact. Relax, he muttered under his breath, his gray eyes scanning the room. You're doing fine. I'm not here to play arm candy, I hissed back, keeping my voice low. You said this was about Lily. He didn't respond, just tilted his head toward a cluster of photographers, their lenses trained on us. The message was clear. This was damage control, a staged performance to keep the tabloids at bay. I hated it, the falseness, the way it mirrored every choice I'd made to get ahead, only to end up hollow. We moved through the crowd, his presence a shield and a cage all at once. I caught snippets of conversation, stock prices, mergers, gossip about some scandal I didn't follow, and felt the weight of their stares. Who was I to them? The mystery, woman on Julian Hart's arm, a nobody clinging to his coattails? My grip tightened on the glass, the cold biting into my palm. Then she appeared, Rachel. She glided toward us like a predator in a red dress. Her dark hair swept back, her smile sharp as a blade. I'd never met her, but I knew her type, power wrapped in charm, the kind that thrived in rooms like this. She stopped in front of us, her gaze flicking over me with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Julian," she purred, her voice smooth as silk. "I see you found a new toy." His jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "Rachel," he said, his tone flat. "A warning. Good to see you too." She ignored him, turning her attention to me, her eyes narrowing as they took me in. Dress, clutch, the faint tremor in my hand I couldn't hide. "You're the tutor, aren't you?" she said, her smile widening, venomous. How quaint. "But don't get comfortable, darling. You're just a shadow of me, a placeholder until he tires of you." Her words sliced through me, sharp and precise, hitting every doubt I'd buried. Was I just a stand-in, a temporary fix for whatever void Julian carried? "Enough," Julian snapped, his voice low but cutting through the hum of the room. He stepped closer to me, his hand firm on my back now, a gesture that felt possessive, protective, or maybe both. "She's here because I asked her to be. That's more than you can say." Rachel's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flashed with something dark, anger, maybe, or hurt. "Oh, Julian," she said, her tone mockingly sweet. "You always did love a project, but she'll never fill my shoes, or hers." She turned on her heel, her dress trailing like blood across the floor, leaving her words hanging in the air like smoke. I pulled away from Julian's touch, my breath shallow. "Who's hers?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't answer, just stared after Rachel, his expression unreadable, stone carved with cracks I couldn't see. "If this is some game, I'm done," I said, setting the champagne on a passing tray. "I didn't sign up to be your pawn." He turned to me then, his eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment I saw it again, that flicker of pain, raw and unguarded. "You're not a pawn," he said, his voice quieter now, almost strained. "I need you here because Lily needs you. The rest—" He trailed off, his hand dropping to his side. "The rest doesn't matter." "Then why does it feel like—" "It does," I pressed, my heart pounding. He didn't respond, just looked away, his silence louder than the chatter around us. I wanted to push harder, to demand answers, about Rachel, about that locked door, about the man beneath the mask, but the weight of the room pressed in, suffocating me. He led me to the car after that, the ride back to the penthouse a blur of rain-streaked windows and unspoken tension. I gripped the door handle, my fingers digging into the leather, replaying Rachel's words. A shadow, a placeholder. Was that all I was? To him? To myself? I'd run from my past, built a life on ambition, only to end up here, caught in someone else's story. As the car pulled up to the curb, Julian finally spoke, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the engine. "Don't let her get to you," he said, his eyes fixed ahead. "I need you because of Lily. That's all." But the way he said it, tight, reluctant, felt like a lie he didn't believe either. I stepped out into the night, the rain cold, against my skin, and watched the car pull away. Lily. It was about Lily. But as I stood there, soaked and unsteady, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was about more. About him. About me. About something neither of us was ready to face. The penthouse was a cavern of shadows tonight, the power cut plunging it into an eerie stillness. Rain lashed the windows, a relentless drumbeat, as I stood in the study with Lily, a single candle flickering between us. Its flame danced, casting jagged shapes across her small face, her blonde hair glowing faintly in the dimness. We'd been halfway through Charlotte's Web when the lights died, and now she sat curled in her chair, quieter than usual, her eyes darting to the hall where that locked door loomed. I shouldn't have stayed. Julian was out. Some late meeting, he'd said, and Eleanor had retreated to her room, leaving me alone with Lily. I could have called it a night, gone home to my own dark apartment, but her soft, "Please stay," had pinned me here. A tether. I couldn't snap. My coat hung damp on the rack, and my fingers itched with restless energy as I watched her fidget with her sweater, tugging at a loose thread. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Do you ever hear it?" I frowned, leaning closer. "Hear what?" She hesitated, her small hands twisting together. "The music, from Daddy's room." My breath caught, a chill prickling up my spine. That tune, the one I'd sworn I'd heard nights ago, faint and mournful. I'd convinced myself it was the wind, a trick of my tired mind. But now, before I could answer, she slid off her chair and padded to her coat, pulling a rusted key from its pocket, a small, jagged thing that glinted in the candlelight. "I found it," she said, her voice trembling. "In his desk. I wasn't supposed to." My heart thudded, loud in my ears. That key, it was for the door. The one Julian guarded like a fortress. The one Rachel's words at the gala had circled back to. "She'll never fill my shoes. Or hers. Hers." "Who?" "Lily, we shouldn't." I started, but she pressed the key into my hand, her fingers cold against mine. "Please," she said, her blue eyes wide, pleading. "I want to know." I stared at her, then at the key, its weight a silent dare. I'd told myself I didn't care, about Julian, about his secrets, but that was a lie. Rachel's taunts, his trembling hand, Lily's quiet need, they'd burrowed under my skin, and I couldn't walk away now. "Stay here," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. She nodded, sinking back into her chair as I stood, the candle in one hand, the key in the other. The hall stretched before me, dark and endless, the door at its end a black slab against the wall. Each step echoed, my pulse racing as the storm roared outside. I shouldn't do this. I should turn back. But my hand moved anyway, sliding the key into the lock. It turned with a groan, the sound sharp and final, and the door swung open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. The candlelight revealed a small room, bare walls, a single shelf, a wooden box on a table. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, and set the candle down. The box was old, its carvings worn, and beside it lay a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon, a photograph tucked beneath. I lifted it, my fingers trembling. A woman, young and smiling, her dark hair swept back, her arms around a tiny blonde girl. Lily. And behind them, Julian, younger, softer, his eyes warm in a way I'd never seen. The truth hit me like a punch. This was her, Lily's mother, the hers Rachel had thrown in my face. I opened the box, and there it was. A music box, its delicate notes spilling out as I lifted the lid. The same tune I'd heard in the storm. My chest tightened, a flood of questions crashing through me. Who was she? What had happened? Why did Julian lock her away like this? Footsteps thundered behind me, and I spun, the photo slipping from my hand. Julian stood in the doorway, rain-soaked and furious, his gray eyes blazing. "Get out!" he roared, his voice a crack of thunder that shook the room. I froze, the candle flickering wildly as he stormed forward, slamming the box shut. "You had no right." "I didn't," I stammered. But he cut me off, his face contorted with rage and something deeper, grief, raw and jagged. "No right," he repeated, his voice breaking. He sank against the table, his hands gripping its edge, and then quieter. "She's gone because of me." The words hung there, heavy, and I saw it. The tremble in his shoulders, the tears he wouldn't let fall. "Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but he shook his head, his breath ragged. "Her name was Anna," he said, each syllable, a wound. "Lily's mother, my wife. She died because I chose work over her, over them. I wasn't there when she needed me." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw the man beneath the mask, broken, haunted, clinging to the pieces. Stood there, clutching the photo I'd picked up, my mind reeling. Anna, the woman Rachel had known, the one I'd never replace. And then it clicked. Rachel's venom, her taunts. "Rachel," I said, my voice shaking. "She was Anna's friend, wasn't she? That's why she hates you." He nodded, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Her best friend. She blames me, says, I killed Anna with my ambition. Maybe she's right." The admission gutted me, stripping away the cold, untouchable Julian I'd built in my head. He was just a man, drowning in guilt, and I'd stumbled into his wreckage. I should have left then, handed him the key and walked out. But I didn't. I stayed, the music box's tune fading into the rain, my hand still holding Anna's face. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Anger, pity, fear. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about him, about me, about the ghosts we both carried. And I couldn't unsee them now. The rain fell in sheets, a gray curtain that turned the penthouse courtyard into a blur of shadows and light. I stood under the overhang, my breath fogging in the cold, watching Rachel pace near the fountain, her red coat a slash of color against the storm. She'd called me here an hour ago, her voice tight and venomous over the phone. "Meet me outside. We need to talk." I'd come, not because I owed her anything, but because last night's revelation, Anna, Julian, that locked room, had left me restless, burning for answers I couldn't find alone. Water dripped from my hair, soaking through my jacket as I stepped out, the chill biting into my skin. Rachel turned at the sound of my boots on the wet stone, her dark eyes narrowing, her lips curling into that familiar cutting smile. "You're braver than I thought," she said, her voice carrying over the roar of the rain. "Or stupider." "What do you want?" I snapped, my hands shoved deep into my pockets to hide their trembling. The air between us crackled, thick, with unspoken history. Hers, Julian's, Anna's. I'd seen the truth in that room, heard it in Julian's broken confession, but Rachel's presence twisted it into something sharper, uglier. She stepped closer, rain streaking her face, her smile fading into something cold and hard. "I want you gone," she said, each word a dagger. "You think you can waltz into his life, play house with Lily, fix what he broke? You're nothing, Clara, just a cheap stand-in for Anna, and he knows it." Her words hit like a slap, reigniting every doubt I'd carried since the gala. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "I'm not here to fix anyone," I shot back, my voice rising over the storm. "I'm here for Lily. That's it." But even as I said it, I felt the lie, Julian's pain, Lily's need. They'd sunk into me, deeper than I wanted to admit. Rachel laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "For Lily? Don't kid yourself. You're here because you're desperate, because your little empire fell apart and you need his money. But you'll never be her. Anna was everything, smart, kind, alive, until he killed her with his neglect." She spat the last word, her eyes blazing with a fury that wasn't just anger, it was grief, raw and festering. I took a step forward, rain plastering my hair to my face. "I don't need to be her," I said, my voice shaking but steady. And I don't need him. If you've got a score to settle, take it up with Julian, not me. I turned to leave, my boots splashing through puddles, but her next word stopped me cold. He'll ruin you too, she called, her voice cutting through the downpour. Just like he ruined us. And Lily, she's next. Look at her, Clara. She's falling apart because of him. I froze, my heart lurching. Lily. I'd left her inside an hour ago, her small frame curled on the couch, her eyes duller than usual. I'd thought it was exhaustion, but now I spun back, closing the distance between us. What do you mean? I demanded, my pulse racing. Rachel smirked, triumphant, and pulled her phone from her coat, shoving it toward me. The screen glowed through the rain, a tabloid headline, bold and brutal. Heart's hidden shame. CEO neglects daughter amid scandal. Below it, a grainy photo of Lily, pale and withdrawn, snapped outside school. The date was yesterday. She's sick, Rachel said, her voice low, venomous. The stress, the rumors, it's killing her, and he doesn't care. Just like Anna, my stomach dropped, a wave of nausea crashing over me. Sick. I'd seen the signs, her quietness, the way she'd clung to me last night. But I hadn't connected it. Not until now. You're lying, I said, but my voice wavered, and Rachel's smile widened. Am I? Go see for yourself. You're not saving her, Clara. You're just another cog in his machine. She turned, walking away into the rain, leaving me standing there, soaked and reeling. I ran back inside, my boots slipping on the marble as I burst into the living room. Lily was still on the couch, a blanket draped over her, but her face was flushed, her breathing shallow. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hand pressing against her forehead. Hot, too hot. Lily, I whispered, panic clawing at me. Hey, wake up. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, and she murmured something I couldn't catch. I grabbed my phone, dialing Julian, my fingers trembling as the line rang. Pick up, I muttered, my heart pounding. When his voice finally came, through, calm, distracted. I didn't wait. Lily's sick, I said, my voice sharp. Fever bad. Get home now. There was a pause, then a curse, and the line went dead. I pulled the blanket tighter around her, my hands moving on instinct as I grabbed a damp cloth from the kitchen, pressing it to her forehead. You're okay, I said, more to myself than her, my voice shaking. I've got you. She leaned into me, her small body trembling, and I felt it. A surge of something fierce, protective, breaking through the walls I'd built. Footsteps echoed behind me, and Julian stormed in, rain-soaked and wild-eyed. What happened? He demanded, dropping beside me. I glared at him, my fear boiling into anger. She's burning up, I said, my voice cutting. Rachel's right. You're letting her fall apart. His face paled, his hands hovering over Lily as if afraid to touch her. Rachel? He rasped, but I didn't answer, just held his gaze, daring him to deny it. He didn't. Instead, he scooped Lily up, his voice breaking as he said, I'm taking her to the hospital. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. Come with me. I shouldn't have. I should have walked away, left him to his mess. But Lily's hand reached for mine, weak and trembling, and I couldn't say no. I grabbed my coat, following him into the rain, my mind a storm of its own. Rachel's words echoed. He'll ruin you too. But as I slid into the car beside them, I knew one thing. I wasn't here for Julian anymore. I was here for her. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the night pressed in heavy and dark as Julian's car sped through the city, I sat in the back, Lily's small, feverish body cradled against me, her head resting on my chest. Her breathing was ragged, each shallow gasp a knife in my gut. I'd pulled a spare sweater from my bag, an old gray thing I kept for emergencies, and slipped it over her, my hands trembling as I smoothed it down. The fabric dwarfed her, but it was warm, and that was all I could give her now. Streetlights flickered through the windows, their glow streaking across her flushed face, and I held her tighter, whispering, "You're okay, sweetheart. We're almost there." Julian gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw set like stone. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m., its green numbers a silent countdown as we raced toward the hospital. He hadn't spoken since we left the penthouse, his eyes fixed on the road, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. Fear, guilt, something deeper I couldn't name. Rachel's words clawed at me. "He'll ruin you too." And I wanted to hate him, to blame him for Lily's fragile state, but the way his hand shook told me he was already drowning in it. "She'll be fine," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the engine. I didn't know if it was true, but I needed to say it. For him, for me, for the silence that threatened to swallow us whole. He didn't respond, just glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his gray eyes raw and unguarded. For the first time, I saw him. Not the CEO, not the cold man who'd hired me, but a father terrified of losing what little he had left. The car swerved slightly, tires hissing on wet asphalt, and he cursed under his breath. "I should have seen it," he said, his voice low, jagged. "The rumors, the press, they've been hounding her at school. I thought she was stronger than this." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "I thought I could protect her by staying away." "You can't protect her from everything," I said, sharper than I meant. "Not like that. She needs you, Julian. Not your money, not your walls." He flinched, his grip tightening on the wheel. But he didn't argue. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew I was right. We pulled into the hospital lot, the neon sign casting a harsh glow over us as he slammed the brakes. He was out in an instant, yanking the back door open and scooping Lily from my arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and I followed, my boots slipping on the slick pavement as we ran toward the entrance. The ER doors slid open, swallowing us in a rush of antiseptic air and fluorescent light. Nurses swarmed, a doctor barking orders, and I stood back, my hands useless at my sides as they whisked her away. Julian started after them, but I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "Let them work," I said, my voice steady, despite the panic clawing at me. He turned, his face a mask of anguish, and for a moment I thought he'd shake me off. But he didn't. He sagged, his shoulders slumping, and I saw it, the crack in his armor widening, spilling out years of buried pain. "I can't lose her," he whispered, so quiet I almost missed it. "Not her too." His hand found mine, gripping it hard, and I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Not when his eyes held mine like that, desperate and broken, begging for something I wasn't sure I could give. We sat in the waiting room, the plastic chairs cold against my legs, the clock ticking too loud. He didn't let go of my hand, and I didn't make him. Minutes stretched into an hour, and then his phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent sound that shattered the stillness. He glanced at it, his expression hardening, and I caught the name on the screen. Rachel. He silenced it, but it buzzed again, and again, until he swore and answered. "What?" he snapped, his voice low but lethal. I couldn't hear her, but his face told me enough. Anger, then something colder, resigned. "No," he said, cutting her off. "It's over, Rachel. I'm done." He hung up, tossing the phone onto the chair beside him and ran a hand through his damp hair. "What did she want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at me, just stared at the floor, his jaw working. "To gloat," he said finally, "and to warn me. The board's meeting tomorrow. They're pushing me out. The scandal, Lily. They've had enough." I frowned, processing. "Pushing you out? Of your own company?" He nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "I've been slipping. Too many late nights, too many mistakes. They've wanted an excuse for months. This is it." "Then fight it," I said, my voice rising. "You built that empire. Don't let them take it." He shook his head, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw something new there. Resolve, quiet and unshakable. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I'm letting it go. If it keeps Lily safe, if it keeps you here, I'll walk away from it all." The words hit me like a wave, stealing my breath. I stared at him, searching for a lie, but there was none. Just a man stripping himself bare, offering up everything he'd clung to. "Julian," I started, but he cut me off, his hand tightening around mine. "I need you, Clara," he said, his voice rough, urgent. "Not just for Lily, for me. I've lost too much already. Don't make me lose you too." I didn't know what to say. My throat closed, my chest aching with the weight of it. His confession, Lily's fever, the choice I hadn't seen coming. The doctor emerged then, breaking the moment, her voice calm as she said, "She's stable. You can see her now." We stood, his hand still in mine, and I followed him down the hall, my mind spinning. He was giving up everything, his company, his pride, for her, for us. And as we stepped into Lily's room, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not anymore. The penthouse felt different tonight, warmer, softer, as if the shadows that once clung to its corners had finally lifted. I sat on the living room floor, legs crossed, a screwdriver in one hand, and the old music box in the other. Its wooden lid lay open, the gears inside exposed like a fragile heart, and Lily knelt beside me, her small fingers tracing the carvings with a quiet awe. She was still pale, her recovery slow after that night in the hospital, but her eyes sparkled, now bright with something I hadn't seen before, hope, maybe, or trust. Julian sat across from us, a pair of pliers in his grip, his sleeves rolled up as he worked a stubborn spring back into place. It had been a week since the hospital, a week since he'd walked away from his empire. The news had hit the tabloids, hard. Heart steps, down amid scandal. But he hadn't flinched. He'd stood before the cameras, his voice steady as he said, "My family comes first," and then turned off the TV, shutting out the world. I'd watched him do it, my chest tight with a mix of disbelief and something softer, something I wasn't ready to name. "Try this," I said, handing him a tiny screw I'd fished from the pile of parts. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and I felt a jolt, small, electric, but enough to make me pause. He didn't seem to notice, just nodded and fitted it into the mechanism, his focus intense. Lily giggled as the spring snapped into place, the first sound of life from her in days, and I couldn't help but smile. "It's almost done," she said, her voice soft but eager. She leaned closer, her shoulder pressing against mine, and I rested a hand on her back, steadying her. The music box had been Anna's. Julian had told me that much in the hospital, his voice low as he'd recounted how she'd played it for Lily every night. Fixing it now felt like more than repair. It was a reclaiming, a stitching together of what had been torn apart. Footsteps echoed from the hall, and Eleanor appeared, her silver hair catching the lamplight. She'd been distant since Lily's illness, her stern edges softened by worry. but tonight she carried a tray. 3 mugs of tea, steam curling upward. She set it down on the coffee table, her gaze settling on me with a weight I hadn't expected. "You're still here," she said, her voice quieter than before. Less accusation and more observation. "Where else would I be?" I replied, meeting her eyes. There was no bite in my words, just a truth I'd come to accept. She studied me for a moment, then stepped closer, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. A gesture so unexpected it stole my breath. "I misjudged you," she said, her tone firm but warm. "You brought him back, both of them." "I couldn't do that." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I didn't do it alone," I said, glancing at Julian. He looked up then, his gray eyes catching mine, and I saw it. The gratitude, the relief, the man I'd glimpsed beneath the wreckage. Eleanor nodded, a rare smile tugging at her lips, and retreated to her chair, leaving us to our quiet work. Julian turned the key on the music box, testing it, and a faint melody spilled out. Tentative at first, then stronger, the notes clear and sweet. Lily clapped, her laughter filling the room, and I felt a warmth spread through me, rooting me to this moment. "It's perfect," she said, beaming at us both, and Julian reached over, ruffling her hair with a tenderness that made my chest ache. He stood then, crossing to me, and before I could react, he pulled me into his arms. The move was sudden, unguarded, his breath warm against my hair as he held me tight. "You didn't just save Lily," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me too." I froze, my hands hovering before settling against his back, the fabric of his shirt soft under my fingers. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and it grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. I started, but he pulled back, his hands framing my face, his eyes searching mine. "You did," he said, firm, unyielding. I was lost, Clara, drowning in guilt, in work, in everything I couldn't fix. You walked in and changed it. I need you here, not just for her, for me. His thumbs brushed my cheeks, and I realized they were wet. Tears, mine, slipping free without warning. I wanted to argue, to retreat behind the walls I'd built. But they were gone, crumbled under Lily's trust, Julian's honesty, this fragile, messy thing we'd become. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice breaking, and it was true. I'd run from my mother, from my past, but I wouldn't run from this, from them. Lily tugged at my sleeve, pulling me down, and I sank back to the floor, letting her nestle against me. Julian joined us, his arms slipping around my shoulders, and we sat there, the 3 of us as the music box played on. Its tune wasn't mournful anymore. It was light, hopeful, a thread weaving us together. I thought of my mother then, her quiet hands folding laundry, her pleas I'd ignored. I'd spent years chasing a life that left me empty. But here, in this penthouse that once felt like a prison, I'd found something real. "I used to think I didn't deserve this," I said, my voice soft, almost lost in the melody. "A family, happiness. But now, I think I do." Julian's arm tightened around me, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "You do," he said. "We all do." Lily yawned, her head dropping to my lap, and I brushed her hair back, my fingers lingering. Eleanor watched from her chair, her eyes glistening, and I knew she saw it too. The healing, the second chance. The lights burned bright around us, no longer cold, and as the music played, I let myself believe it. This was home. Not perfect, not without scars, but ours. A happiness carved from the ruins, strong enough to last. If you've been swept away by this journey of heartbreak, redemption, and hope, don't forget to hit that like button. It means the world to me. And if you want more stories that tug at your heart and lift your spirit, subscribe now so you never miss an update. Let's keep this adventure going together. See you again.